The velvet curtains of London's Royal Opera House swayed with the faintest draught. Applause thundered moments ago, but backstage, silence reigned. In a dressing room lined with gilt mirrors and wilting roses, Isabella Moretti, the night's triumphant soprano, lay motionless upon her chaise. The sharp scent of violets clung to the air, mingling with something far more sinister. As a stagehand screamed, the theater descended into chaos. Hercule Poirot, seated in a box among the fashionable elite, leaned forward. His little gray cells already stirred to life. A death at the opera. Ah, what could be more dramatic? Chapter 1. Death in the Spotlight. The Royal Opera House glittered like a jewel against the London night. Its domed roof, haloed in mist from the nearby Thames, shimmered beneath the glow of 100 lamps. Outside, carriages and motor cars alike lined the cobblestone street. Chauffeurs stood at attention, their breath misting in the chill, while ladies in fur stoles and gentlemen in evening tails spilled out into the winter air, still intoxicated by music and champagne. Within, the atmosphere of grandeur clung heavily. Velvet curtains, gilt balconies, the faint perfume of roses scattered by admiring patrons. That evening had been marked by triumph. Isabella Moretti, the Italian soprano of unparalleled renown, had sung her farewell performance, or so she had announced weeks prior. Rumors whispered that she would retire at the height of her powers, withdrawing to a villa on Lake Como with fortune and fame secure. Yet others hinted darker tales. Debts, quarrels, a heart broken by some unseen hand. For now, such speculation mattered little. The audience had risen to its feet as her final aria cascaded into the rafters, a torrent of golden sound that seemed to cling to the crystal chandeliers themselves. Her curtain call had been thunderous. London, fickle in its affections, adored her utterly. Among those applauding in a private box was a small, immaculately dressed man with a waxed mustache that air smelled of grease paint, dust, and wilting flowers. Stagehands bustled, carpenters dismantled scenery, and singers stripped away their masks of artifice. Amid this labyrinth of ropes and mirrors, Isabella Moretti disappeared into her dressing room to receive visitors and change from costume to gown. What happened next would ripple through every corridor of the opera house and beyond. The cry came first, a shrill, unearthly wail that froze those within earshot. A young stagehand, pale and trembling, staggered into the corridor, her eyes wide with horror. "Madame Moretti, she is not moving." Chaos erupted. Singers rushed from their dressing rooms, costumers dropped armfuls of silks, and stage managers barked questions no one could answer. Someone ran for the theater's physician, another for the police. The murmur of shock spread like smoke until it reached the ears of Jap, who had been in the process of fetching his hat. Poirot, quicker to sense the disturbance, laid a gloved hand upon his companion's arm. "Attend, Jap. There is something, A drama behind the curtain." "Looks that way." Jap's jaw tightened. "Come on, then." They followed the stream of onlookers down a narrow corridor lined with gilt-framed mirrors, their glass reflecting pale faces and anxious whispers. At the end, a door stood ajar, Isabella Moretti's dressing room. Within, the light of a chandelier glimmered upon gilt and velvet, upon roses strewn across a table, upon costumes draped carelessly upon chairs. And there, reclining upon a chaise longue as if struck mid-pose, lay Isabella herself. She was still clad in her final costume, a gown of white silk embroidered with silver threads that shimmered under the lights. Her dark hair tumbled in perfect waves about her shoulders, her lips slightly parted as though she were about to sing again. But her eyes, wide and staring, fixed upon nothing. Japp pushed through the murmuring crowd. "Stand back, all of you," he barked. "Clear the way. Police business." Poirot followed, his small fist toward the perfume vial, then to the charred scrap of paper within the fireplace. He stepped closer, using the silver tip of his cane to nudge the ashes. A few words remained legible. "You shall regret." The rest was consumed. "Regret what, madam?" Poirot whispered, gazing down at Isabella's lifeless form. "And why must your curtain fall so suddenly?" As order was restored, stagehands dismissed, gawking singers herded away, Poirot crouched beside the body, his immaculate trousers forming a sharp crease even in this undignified posture. He did not touch Isabella. Instead, he observed with meticulous care the faint discoloration about her lips, the unnatural stillness of her chest. He bent slightly, sniffed, and recoiled. The perfume's sweetness was cloying, almost nauseating. "Do you observe, Japp, how heavily it lingers? No lady of refinement applies so much. No, this has been altered." Japp frowned. "You mean poison? Perhaps. Or perhaps only the stage is not the only place for drama tonight." Poirot rose gracefully, brushing invisible dust from his cuffs. "But I think, yes, we look upon murder." The word hung in the air like a final chord. Outside the dressing room, murmurs continued. A handful of key figures lingered in the corridor, their faces lit by curiosity and fear. Poirot, emerging with Japp, allowed his gaze to travel from one to the other, noting each expression. First, there was Victor Hargrave, the opera's celebrated baritone, whose handsome features were twisted now in fury and disbelief. "This is madness," he muttered, pacing like a caged animal. "She cannot be dead. She cannot." Beside him, Clara Beaumont, the understudy, clutched a shawl around her shoulders, her pale face streaked with tears. She looked scarcely more than 20, and the tremor of her hands suggested either innocence or a guilty conscience barely concealed. A few paces away stood Lord Pembroke, the opera's most generous patron. Study in contrasts, where the stage dazzled with velvet, gilt, and chandeliers. Here the walls were bare, the chairs utilitarian, the air heavy with the mingled scents of dust, candle grease, and the faint acrid tang of stage paint. Yet on this night, the modest space held a company of the finest figures of London society and the operatic world. They had not assembled by choice, but by necessity, shepherded by the firm arm of Inspector Japp and the gentle insistence of Hercule Poirot. The body of Isabella Moretti remained under careful guard in her dressing room. Outside, word had not yet reached the departing audience. Rumor was contained for the moment behind closed doors. But within, every whispered conversation, every glance, carried the sharp edge of suspicion. Poirot stood by the door, hands neatly folded before him, his green eyes alive with curiosity. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice calm, almost soothing. It is not pleasant, I know, to be gathered thus. But the death of La Belle Isabella cannot be dismissed as mere chance. Until we have clarity, it is necessary that I and my esteemed colleague Inspector Japp hear from each of you. Japp, leaning against the mantelpiece with arms folded, nodded gruffly. Nobody's leaving until we've got the facts. Best you all cooperate. Poirot inclined his head. We begin, perhaps, with Monsieur Victor Hargrave. Victor Hargrave rose from his chair as if propelled by indignation. He was a man of striking appearance, tall, broad-shouldered. His dark hair swept back with fastidious care. His baritone had won him acclaim on the very boards where Isabella had reigned supreme. But at this moment his voice, though rich, trembled with suppressed anger. She stole everything, Hargrave declared, pacing the length of the lounge like a restless panther. Every role that should have been mine, every ovation, every praise. Do you know what it is, Monsieur Poirot, to labor for years, to perfect your craft, only to be cast aside so that blotched with tears, her eyes wide with fear? Mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, lowering his voice. You were close to Madame Moretti, were you not? Clara nodded shakily. I was her understudy. She was kind to me, at first. She promised to recommend me to the Milan Conservatoire. She said I had talent, but I lacked polish. Promised, Poirot echoed. And later, perhaps, withdrew the promise. Clara's lips trembled. Tonight she told me I was not ready, that I must wait. She said she could not, after all, write the letter. It was everything to me, Monsieur Poirot. Everything. But I swear, I never wished her harm. I admired her. I adored her. Poirot's gaze softened. Adoration, mademoiselle, sometimes turns most easily to resentment. And yet, he tilted his head. You smell faintly of violets. Tell me, you borrowed her perfume, perhaps? Clara flinched, tightening her shawl. She lent it to me once, weeks ago. I still keep the scarf she touched. Japp raised a brow. That sounds like more than admiration. I only wanted to be like her, Clara whispered. Is that so terrible? Poirot filed the observation away, his little gray cells humming. Lord Pembroke, Poirot announced, and the wealthy patron unfolded himself from his chair with the languid grace of one long accustomed to deference. His evening attire was immaculate. His diamond cufflinks glittered in the gaslight. Yet his eyes, sharp, calculating, betrayed a man measuring each word before it left his lips. A tragedy, he drawled, drawing on a cigarette. Nothing more. The opera has lost its brightest jewel, and I have lost a companion. Companion, Japp repeated with a grunt. Pembroke's smile was thin. Madame Moretti and I enjoyed one another's company. Beyond that, it is not the business of Scotland Yard. Poirot tapped a finger against his lips. And yet, milord, rumor whispers of quarrels, of promises unkept, of scandal feared. This theater, I would never destroy it. But would you destroy its star? Poirot asked softly. Lefebvre's eyes blazed, but she held her tongue. Lastly, Dr. Julian Cross stepped forward, his features drawn, his hands trembling despite the handkerchief he twisted between them. His white hair lent him dignity, but his bloodshot eyes betrayed a man worn thin. I did all I could for her, he muttered. She never rested. Her voice, her body, it was all under strain. I warned her, begged her to take care. But she lived only for the stage. Poirot studied him closely. And when she would not obey, did you act for her own good? Cross slammed his fist upon the table, startling the others. Never! I loved her, do you understand? I loved her, though she gave her heart elsewhere. She was reckless, but she was my world. To think that anyone believes I could... His voice broke and he turned away, shoulders shaking. Jap muttered to Poirot, "The man's besotted. That alone could be motive." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot murmured. "But passion, while dangerous, does not always lead to poison." The suspects had spoken, each revealing fragments of truth and glimpses of deception. Poirot stood once more, adjusting his immaculate cuffs. "Mes amis," he said quietly, "we are faced with a crime most cruel. Each of you had reason, however small, to wish Madame Moretti ill. One among you has given voice to that desire in the most terrible fashion." He paused, letting the words hang. "But remember this. The truth, it sings louder than lies. It will be heard, no matter how you seek to silence it." There was silence in the lounge. Clara wept softly into her shawl. Hargrave stared at the floor, fists clenched. Pembroke's face was stone. Lefebvre fanned herself in furious silence. Cross stood rigid, breathing heavily. Poirot's eyes glittered. "We shall see, Inspector Japp, what ceremony." The air inside was heavy, almost suffocating. The scent of violets clung oppressively, mingling with the stale perfume of roses left too long in water. It was not the clean, delicate fragrance of a lady's toilette, but something cloying, sinister, like sweetness curdled. Poirot closed the door softly behind him and stood still, his eyes roving with the care of one who sought meaning in every shadow. The scene was unchanged from earlier. Isabella's form still draped across the chaise longue, untouched until the coroner's arrival, the mirror catching and multiplying the lamplight, the pearls scattered like drops of frozen moonlight upon the rug. Yet Poirot felt already that the room whispered secrets to those who listened. "Looks much the same to me," Japp muttered, lighting a cigarette. "She's dead, sure enough. But whether by foul play or by fate," Poirot raised a hand sharply. "Fate, mon ami, rarely chooses perfume bottles as its instrument. Regardez." He crossed to the vanity table, where amidst powders, brushes, and a silver-backed hand mirror sat the cut-glass perfume vial. Its stopper lay beside it, crusted faintly with crystals. Poirot lifted it carefully with a handkerchief, holding it beneath his nose for the briefest moment before withdrawing with a frown. "Too much," he murmured. "Far, far too much." Japp leaned closer, wrinkling his nose. "Smells like any other lady's scent to me. Bit strong, perhaps." Poirot wagged a finger. A lady of Isabella's refinement, she would never over-apply. No, she knew the art, the balance. This vial, it is not innocent. There is something within, I am certain. "Poison?" Japp asked bluntly. Poirot inclined his head. "A most theatrical choice, is it not? To transform beauty into death. What more fitting in an opera house?" Japp scribbled in his notebook, his brow furrowed. "Well, send it to the yard for testing. But even if it's poisoned, who put it there? Anyone could have entered this room. Poirot did not answer. He was studying the glass itself, his green eye reproach, and then poof, into the fire. He tapped the ash lightly, but the fire did not consume all. It leaves behind a whisper, enough for Poirot to hear. Jap gave a snort. You and your whispers, it'll stick to witnesses and fingerprints. Poirot smiled faintly. And yet, mon cher Jap, it is the whisper that tells the truth, while the shout seeks to deceive. The rest of the room received equal scrutiny. Poirot noted the overturned chair, its legs scuffed against the polished boards. A struggle, or merely clumsiness in the final moments? He stooped to examine the pearls scattered upon the rug. They had snapped from a necklace, perhaps torn in haste. One, lodged beneath the chaise, gleamed faintly in shadow. Poirot retrieved it, polishing it between finger and thumb. Pearls, Jap, are not easily broken. They require force or intent. Why was she reaching? For what? Or someone grabbed at her? Jap muttered. Precisely. Poirot pocketed the single pearl as though it were the crown jewel. For some minutes he stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, absorbing details as though he were a painter fixing a composition in his mind. His little gray cells were already arranging, discarding, arranging again. A poisoned perfume vial, a half-burned letter, a broken necklace, each item a note in a score of death. Finally, Poirot spoke. This chamber is like the stage, Jap, everything arranged with meaning, each prop a clue. We must read it as an audience reads an opera, not by sound alone, but by gesture, by symbol. Jap shook his head. Sometimes I think you've been in London too long, Poirot. You're beginning to sound like one of these theater fellows. Poirot's mustache twitched. But it is theater, mon ami. Life, always it is theater. And here, the drama has ended with the fall of the curtain. Their work was interrupted by a knock at the door. A young constable entered, his face flushed. Begging your pardon, sir, he said to Jap, but the witnesses are restless. They're asking how long— Jewel. At last he turned to Jap. The truth, it will not hide forever. We have enough to know. This was no accident. Someone has poisoned Madame Moretti. The how, we begin to see. The who, that is for tomorrow. Jap stubbed out his cigarette. Well, haul them all in, one by one. Question them until the cracks show. Poirot shook his head gently. Non, non. Too much force and the bird flies. Better we wait. We watch. We let them believe their lies safe upon their lips. Then, when the moment comes, we pluck it from them, neat as one plucks a pearl from the string. He glanced once more at the charred letter, the perfume, the scattered necklace. Then he smoothed his mustache and prepared to depart. The play continues, Inspector, he said softly. And Hercule Poirot, he does not miss the smallest note. The constable closed the door behind them, leaving the dressing room in silence. Yet the scent of violets lingered still, heavy and unnatural, like a ghost refusing to depart. Chapter 4. A jealous baritone. The opera house, emptied of its grand audience, seemed transformed. By daylight it was all chandeliers, polished marble, velvet curtains. Now, in the hollow hours after midnight, it was a shadowed labyrinth of echoing corridors. The chorus and orchestra had been dismissed, the crowd dispersed. but those whose names had been marked in Inspector Japp's notebook were gathered in the green room, a gilded salon now pressed into service as an antechamber of suspicion. Among them sat Antonio Bellini, the celebrated baritone of Covent Garden. He cut a fine figure even in distress. His thick mane of dark hair was brushed carefully, his chin lifted at a proud angle. His chest swelled with the confidence of one who had been applauded in every capital of Europe. Yet the flicker of his dark eyes betrayed something more restless, a guardedness, a heat, a wounded pride. When Hercule Poirot entered, Bellini rose at once, bowing with dramatic flourish. "Messieurs," he said, his voice rich and sonorous even in a whisper, press alike. He spoke of her voice in terms almost reverent. She was divine, he said, pressing a hand to his breast. A nightingale, a siren, a queen upon the stage. None could rival her. Yet Poirot's gaze sharpened. And yet, monsieur, in the theater world, rivalry is never far from admiration, is it not? Bellini's smile faltered. Rivalry? Between Isabella and myself? Nonsense. Nevertheless, Japp interrupted. We have been told there was tension between you two. Arguments during rehearsals. Quarrels over curtain calls. Bellini's eyes flashed. Ah, gossip. Idle tongues jealous of greatness. Yes, perhaps once or twice I raised my voice. What singer does not? But we were comrades in art. Poirot tapped his fingertips together. Comrades, perhaps, but never lovers. Bellini's brows lifted in mock astonishment. Lovers? Mon Dieu! That woman, she was an enchantress, but also, how shall I say, a tempest. Beautiful but dangerous. I admired her, I worked with her, but my heart. He thumped his chest melodramatically. My heart is not so foolish as to be enslaved. Poirot inclined his head. Yet your vanity, monsieur, that is another matter. And Isabella Moretti, she had the power to wound it. For the first time, Bellini's mask cracked. He shifted in his seat, his hands tightening on the arms of the chair. You speak boldly, monsieur. I speak truly, Poirot replied. It is said she overshadowed you, that the audiences came for her voice, her presence, and you, though famous, became her supporting player. Did that not sting, even for a great baritone? Bellini rose abruptly, his voice booming through the chamber. Enough! I will not be insulted like a criminal. Japp leaned forward unimpressed. Sit down, Bellini. You'll answer the questions or I'll see to it you answer them at the yard. For a moment Bellini glared at him, his nostrils flaring like a bull's. Then, with theatrical resignation, he behind. Then, I came here again. That is all. Poirot's gaze did not waver. Yet you were seen near her door. Bellini stiffened. By whom? By one who had no reason to lie. The baritone's lips tightened, but he did not answer. Instead, he turned his head away, staring at the velvet curtains with a smoldering expression. Japp slammed his notebook shut. You had motive, Bellini. She overshadowed you, she quarreled with you, and if this perfume bottle proves to be poisoned, you're high on my list. Bellini leapt up again, his fists clenched. Poison, perfume, this is madness. You think I, Antonio Bellini, would stoop to such cowardice? No, monsieur. If I wished her gone, I would have told her so to her face. Poirot's eyes glimmered. And perhaps you did. The silence that followed was heavy, tense. At last, Bellini dropped back into his chair, breathing hard. "You have no proof," he said hoarsely. "No proof at all." "Perhaps not yet," Poirot murmured. "But proof, monsieur. It has a way of revealing itself." After the interrogation, Bellini was dismissed under watch. He left the green room with a swish of his cloak, his head held high, yet his eyes darting as though to assure himself no shadow followed too closely. Poirot watched him go, his face unreadable. "A proud man," Japp muttered. "And proud men have their breaking points. He's got temper enough for murder." Poirot stroked his mustache. Yes, the temper, it is clear. But let us not mistake the thunder for the lightning. It is the lightning, mon ami, that strikes to kill. When Bellini was gone, Poirot strolled slowly about the green room. It was a handsome chamber, walls lined with gilt-framed portraits of singers long dead, couches draped in velvet, lamps shaded in crimson silk. Yet beneath the elegance lingered a nervous atmosphere. The chorus members whispered among themselves. The conductor tapped impatiently upon his watch. Clara, the understudy, sat pale, stepped into the mist-laden street. A single thought returned again and again. If not Bellini, then who? For someone, somewhere among those gilded voices, had turned song into silence, and that someone still moved freely in the shadows of Covent Garden. Chapter 5. The Understudy's Secret. The dawn mist had scarcely lifted from Covent Garden when Hercule Poirot returned to the opera house. Though he had taken but a few hours' rest, his appearance was immaculate. Shoes polished to a gleam, mustache waxed to the finest symmetry, his gray suit pressed with military precision. Where others carried fatigue like a cloak, Poirot wore only alertness. Inspector Japp, however, was less fortunate. He arrived yawning, his trilby askew, his temper short. "Confound these theater people," he muttered. "Always riddles and tantrums. Give me a plain East End stabbing any day." Poirot only smiled. "But mon ami, what is life without its little dramas? Here, in this house of song, we shall find the truth, provided we listen carefully enough." Their task that morning was clear. The questioning of Clara Whitfield, Isabella Moretti's understudy. She was a slender young woman, scarcely more than 20, with pale English features and large, anxious eyes. The grandeur of the opera seemed to weigh upon her frail frame. When she entered the green room at Japp's summons, she clutched her shawl as though it were armor. "Miss Whitfield," Japp began brusquely, "we'll be asking you some questions about last night. Best to answer plainly." "Yes, Inspector," Clara whispered, sinking into a chair. Poirot observed her with gentleness. "You admired Isabella Moretti greatly, did you not?" Clara hesitated, twisting her hands together. "She was magnificent. No one could equal her. Every night she sang, it was as if the heavens opened." "Ah, but admiration, it can carry also the sting of envy, n'est-ce pas?" Poirot asked softly. Her eyes flashed, then dropped. I wanted to be like her, but she was kind to me, truly. She gave me advice, Clara stopped herself, biting her lip. Japp leaned forward. "We've heard she promised to recommend you for a part in Milan, then changed her mind. Is that true?" The girl's cheeks flushed scarlet. She said she would speak to Maestro." "Perhaps not. Memory, mademoiselle. It is a delicate flower. Sometimes it blooms, Sometimes it deceives. Tell me, after you left the door, where did you go? Clara swallowed. To the wardrobe room. I stayed there until the commotion began. You may ask Madame Lenoir, the wardrobe mistress. She saw me. Poirot inclined his head graciously. We shall. The interrogation might have ended there had Poirot not noticed the curious bulge in Clara's reticule, which she clutched close to her side. His little gray cell stirred. Pardon me, mademoiselle, he said gently. But your bag. It seems most heavy for so small a lady. May I ask what it contains? Clara started. Only my handkerchiefs, Monsieur Poirot. May I see? She hesitated. Her knuckles whitened around the reticule's clasp. Then, with trembling hands, she opened it. Within lay a folded letter, the edges browned with singe marks. Jap pounced at once. What's this? Let's have it! He snatched it before Clara could protest, unfolding it roughly. The letter was incomplete, half-burned, the ink blurred but legible enough. You shall regret the humiliation you gave me before them all. You think yourself untouchable, but I swear. The rest was charred away. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Très intéressant. A letter of anger, of threat. And it was you, mademoiselle, who placed it in Isabella's grate. Clara's face drained of color. No. I found it there after she was gone. I meant to give it to someone, to show what, precisely? Poirot asked gently. Her lips quivered. That someone hated her enough to write such words, not I. I loved her despite everything. I kept the letter only because I was afraid they would think it was mine. Jap growled. Convenient story. Looks bad for you, girl. Motive, opportunity, evidence in your bag. No, Clara cried, tears brimming. I didn't poison her, I swear it. I could never. Poirot raised a timid face beside the perfume vial. The burned letter, the broken necklace. A pattern was forming, but the lines were faint, elusive. Later that morning, Poirot sought out Madame Lenoir, the wardrobe mistress. A stout Frenchwoman with a sharp tongue, she confirmed Clara's story. Yes, I saw her, Madame Lenoir declared, adjusting her spectacles. She came to me after the curtain, trembling like a leaf. Asked for thread, of all things. I told her to sit quietly while I finished with the gowns. She remained until the noise began. That poor child is too frightened to kill a fly, let alone La Moretti. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, madame. You are most helpful. As he left, he murmured to himself, always there is the appearance, and always there is the truth. We must be careful to distinguish. That evening, Poirot and Jap reviewed their findings in the inspector's office. The evidence now stood thus. The perfume vial, likely poisoned. The broken pearl necklace, suggesting a struggle. The half-burned, threatening letter. Bellini's jealousy and pride. Clara's disappointment and fear. Yet for all this, no clear hand revealed itself. It's like a blasted opera, Jap grumbled, rubbing his temples. Everyone's shouting, no one telling the truth. Poirot smiled faintly. But remember, Inspector, in opera the truth is always sung in the final act. Until then, we must attend carefully to the motifs. The chapter closed with a quiet moment. Poirot sat alone in his lodgings, gazing at the single pearl he had retrieved from Isabella's dressing room. It gleamed faintly in the lamplight, a symbol of something broken, something torn from its string. He placed it carefully beside the fragment of letter. Together they told a story, but not yet the whole story. And as the clock struck midnight, Poirot whispered to himself, "The understudy hides her secret. But there is another, larger secret, one that waits still in the shadows." Chapter 6. The Conductor's Confession. The following afternoon the fog lifted slightly, revealing London. Maestro himself. He is waiting in the rehearsal room. "Excellent," Poirot murmured. "For the conductor, he is the heart of the opera. And the heart, it feels much. It may confess more than it intends." They entered the rehearsal hall, a vast chamber of echoing acoustics, its polished floor scuffed by countless hours of practice. At the far end, beneath tall windows, stood Maestro Carlo Varini, baton in hand, though no orchestra played. He was a tall, gaunt Italian with a mane of silver hair and a hawk-like profile. His eyes, deep-set and burning, seemed to command silence even in emptiness. When he turned to greet them, his bow was stiff, curt. "Messieurs, you wish to interrogate me, like a common criminal?" His accent rolled the words in rich vowels, tinged with scorn. "Not interrogate," Poirot said smoothly. "Merely to understand." Japp pulled out his notebook. "You conducted last night's performance of La Traviata?" "Of course. Who else?" Varini snapped. "I have conducted it 100 times. It was perfection, until tragedy intruded." "Tell us of Isabella Moretti," Poirot said gently. Varini's face softened, though his eyes remained fierce. "She was my protégée. I discovered her in Milan, a mere girl with a voice like crystal. I shaped her, guided her, gave her the stage. Without me, she would still be singing in village choirs. And yet," Poirot said, "some whisper she outshone even her maestro." Varini's nostrils flared. "She was brilliant, yes. Too brilliant. She knew it. Audiences adored her. Critics worshipped her. And she—" His hand tightened around the baton until the knuckles whitened. "She forgot who gave her wings." Japp leaned forward. "You quarreled with her?" Varini's voice dropped low, vibrating with intensity. "We quarreled always. She was headstrong, ambitious, vain. She defied my instructions, ignored my tempi, seized the spotlight at every turn. I warned her. Music it fully." Varini sank onto the piano bench, his shoulders bowed. He spoke not to them, but to the empty hall, as though confessing to ghosts. "She shamed me before the company 3 nights ago. She mocked my age, my tempo, my authority." The orchestra laughed behind their stands. I burned with rage. That night I wrote the letter. I told her she would regret her insolence. I meant I would refuse to conduct for her again. That was all. No more. "And why then was the letter burned?" Poirot asked. "She brought it to me the next day," Varini murmured. "She waved it before me like a trophy. 'Your threats mean nothing,' she said. She tossed it into her fireplace, laughing. I had no answer." Silence stretched across the rehearsal hall. Even Japp seemed uncertain now. Poirot regarded Varini steadily. "And last night? Did you see her after the performance?" Varini's face hardened once more. "No. I conducted, I bowed, I left the pit. That is all." Yet, Poirot said, a witness heard a man's voice raised in her room. Harsh, angry. Was it yours, Maestro? Verini's eyes blazed. No! The word echoed through the chamber. I did not go near her. I swear it upon my honor as a musician. Poirot inclined his head. Honor is a fine thing, monsieur, yet it is fragile, like glass. A single crack and it shatters. When they left the rehearsal hall, Jap was scowling fiercely. So he admits the letter's his. That's plenty for me. We've got him on temper, motive, and opportunity. Poirot shook his head slowly. No, my friend. He is proud, yes, and his temper is fierce. But poison, that is not the weapon of Maestro Verini. He is a man of storms, not of powders. He would rather duel with his baton than with a perfume vial. You're too quick to let them off, Jap grumbled. Every one of them had reason. Moretti must have been destroyed by Isabella herself. The suspects. Bellini with his pride, Clara with her envy, Verini with his wrath. And yet, none fit perfectly. Poirot stroked his mustache. The truth, it hides itself as a note hidden among harmonies. But soon the melody will reveal all. He extinguished the lamp. Outside, the city lay hushed. But within the walls of the opera, secrets still lingered, waiting, like music unplayed, for the conductor's downbeat. Chapter 7. The Diva's Diary. The rain had returned by morning, pattering against the narrow window panes of Poirot's flat in Whitechapel. A chill mist clung to the city streets, blurring lamps and muffling sound. Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever in a dove-gray suit, sat at his breakfast table with a single boiled egg, which he measured carefully against his spoon. Across from him, Inspector Jap looked impatient, his tea untouched. "You don't have dawdle over your food," he muttered. "Here we are, with a murderer loose in London, and you're timing your egg like a chemist weighing powder." Poirot tapped the shell delicately. "Precision, my dear Jap, is the mother of truth. One must cultivate order in the smallest matters, if one is to discern order in the greatest." Jap sighed. "Well, here's something that might tempt you away from your egg. We've been through Isabella Moretti's personal effects. There's a diary." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Ah, enfin. The voice of the dead speaks in ink. Bring it to me." The diary was bound in red leather, scuffed at the edges, clasped with a tiny gilt lock now forced open. Poirot lifted it as though it were a holy relic. On the first page, in an elegant hand, the name was inscribed. Isabella Moretti, 1928. He turned the pages slowly, reverently. The entries began with the triumphant tones of a rising star, exuberant notes about applause, bouquets of roses, champagne suppers. Yet as the weeks passed, the writing darkened, shadows creeping between the lines. Poirot read aloud, his voice low. "Suspicion. Yet, do you not find it curious, mon ami, how her pen paints all around her in darkness? It is as though she gathered enemies on purpose, an opera of malice, with herself at the center." Poirot turned to the final entries, dated only days before her death. Another letter. Always the letters. Threats, accusations. "They say I shall regret my pride, my vanity, but they cannot harm me. I am invincible. I am Isabella. Yet, last night I dreamt of poison, a bitter taste, a darkness closing in. I woke gasping. Why should I dream of poison unless I sense it near me? Poirot closed the book with a soft snap. Japp leaned forward. So she did receive letters, more than one. We've only got Veronis, but sounds like others might have written to her too. That's damning evidence. Or, Poirot murmured, it is a clever trick. A woman such as Isabella, she is always performing, even upon the page. Perhaps she wrote as much for her own drama as for truth. Her diary may be a mirror, but one that distorts. Still, Japp said, it's proof she feared Clara, distrusted Verini, and turned away Bellini. That's plenty motive between them. Oui, plenty, Poirot said softly. Too plenty. When everyone is guilty, perhaps no one is. Later that afternoon, Poirot returned alone to the opera house. The diary weighed heavily in his pocket. The corridors were hushed, as though the building itself mourned. In Isabella's dressing room, the faint scent of violets still lingered. Poirot seated himself at her vanity and studied the mirrored reflection of the little red book. He opened it again, tracing a passage with his fingertip. The ink here was smudged, as though by a hurried hand. He came again tonight, begging, pleading. I told him no, always no. Why will he not hear me? Poirot frowned. No name, only he. Was it Bellini, the maestro? Someone else, not yet in the circle of suspects? He examined the handwriting closely. Pieces of a puzzle. He noted the frequency of certain words: envy, pride, fear, poison. Always circling, always dramatic. He compared the handwriting of the last entries to earlier ones. The strokes were uneven, the pressure different. Could it be that someone else had written the final pages? He fetched from his drawer the fragments of Veroni's burned letter, laying them beside the diary. The comparison was striking. The curves of certain letters echoed Isabella's own hand. Poirot tapped the desk thoughtfully. What if, ma foi, she wrote the threats herself, to heighten the drama, to bind her enemies close, to play the role of the hunted diva? Such a woman, intoxicated by her own importance, might invent danger where none existed. Yet she was dead. Poison was no invention. Poirot leaned back, eyes narrowing. Unless someone saw her game and decided to turn her fantasy into reality. 2 days later, Poirot summoned Japp to Scotland Yard with great urgency. The diary lay open between them, several pages marked with slips of paper. Observe, Japp, Poirot said. This passage here, I dreamt of poison. And this, another letter arrived. They are written in ink slightly different, a shade darker and with a broader nib. Compared to the earlier entries, they are not the same hand. Japp squinted. You're saying someone tampered with the diary? Précisément. After her death, or perhaps even before, someone added words to deepen suspicion, to scatter blame among the others. A diary is a stage, mon ami, and upon it the killer wrote their part. Japp slammed the table. By thunder, Poirot, that means half what we've been working on might be false. Clara's envy, Veroni's rage, Bellini's obsession, all just painted darker to point our noses the wrong way. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Just so. The murderer is cunning. They hide behind Isabella's voice. But a false note, Japp. It always betrays itself. That night, as Poirot retired, he whispered a promise to the shadows of his room. Madame, is then the truth slips out. One by one, the summoned suspects arrived. Signor Bellini came first, his cloak sweeping behind him, his dark eyes flashing with indignation. "What charade is this, monsieur? I am not a schoolboy to be called from my bed." Poirot inclined his head. "Patience, signor. All will be explained." Clara Dawson followed, pale as alabaster, clutching her shawl as though it were armor. Her hands trembled, and her eyes darted nervously around the empty theater. Next came Maestro Verini, gaunt and fierce, his silver hair gleaming like steel in the lamplight. He carried himself stiffly, as though conducting even the silence. Finally, the director, Mr. Latham, entered, weary and scowling. "This is highly irregular, Poirot. The house is closed. What do you mean by it?" "I mean," Poirot said gently, "to recreate a performance, though of a different kind. Please be seated. You are the audience, and I the conductor tonight." They gathered reluctantly in the front row of the darkened stalls. Poirot remained upon the stage, small and neat against the cavernous backdrop. His voice carried with surprising strength, "Mesdames et messieurs, we come to the climax of a tragedy. The star of the opera, Isabella Moretti, has fallen, poisoned in her own dressing room. Each of you had reason to resent her. Each of you was near at hand. And each of you has felt the suspicion of the law." Clara gave a small sob. Bellini muttered an oath in Italian. Verini sat rigid, arms crossed, while Latham scowled more deeply. Poirot raised a finger. "But tonight we play again the final act. We rehearse the scene of her death in this very theater. And in doing so, perhaps the guilty hand shall reveal itself." He beckoned Clara to the stage. "Mademoiselle, you shall take the place of Isabella. Sit here, at the vanity." Clara hesitated, trembling. I cannot." "You can, and you will," Poirot said firmly, though kindly. "It is but a chair," a defiance of his baton. Verini mounted the stage, his every movement taut with suppressed fury. He towered over Clara, his voice booming. "You disgrace the music. You dishonor me. Without discipline, you are nothing but a songbird." Clara cowered. Poirot raised his hand once more. "Stop. Observe, Jap. Such wrath is tempestuous, but tempestuous anger does not measure powders, does not decant poison drop by drop." Verini's nostrils flared. "So you dismiss me as incapable? Beware, Poirot. I am a man, not a caricature." "Just so," Poirot said smoothly. "And therefore, you interest me." At last Poirot turned to Clara. "And now, mademoiselle, you sit in the chair of your rival, the diva who overshadowed you. What do you feel?" Clara's voice quavered. "I feel small, invisible. I was always invisible beside her." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "Invisible. And yet, to the invisible comes a temptation. To strike. To make oneself seen at last. Perhaps with poison. The weapon that requires neither strength nor confrontation." Clara's eyes widened, tears spilling down her cheeks.
No, I swear, I never—
Poirot silenced her with a raised hand. Patience, mademoiselle. We are but rehearsing. And now we come to the final prop. From his pocket, Poirot produced a small glass vial, identical in shape to the perfume bottle found in Isabella's dressing room. Its contents glittered faintly in the lamplight. The suspects leaned forward, tense. This, Poirot said softly, is not poison, but colored water. Yet in her chamber, the true vial lay shattered, its scent masking death. Who placed it there? Who prepared that night? All eyes turned upon her. Poirot's voice was gentle. Who, mademoiselle? Clara shook her head, sobbing. I dare not say. They will ruin me. Poirot knelt beside her, his hand light upon her arm. Courage, my child. To conceal truth is to aid murder. Whom did you see? Clara lifted her tear-streaked face, her lips parted. And then, from the stalls, Maestro Veroni's voice thundered. Silence! Do not listen to her! She lies to save herself. The theater erupted in shouting. Bellini leapt up, gesticulating wildly. Latham swore under his breath, demanding order. Clara sobbed louder. Poirot stood calm amid the chaos, his eyes glinting. He raised both hands. Mes amis, enough! This is the rehearsal's end. Tomorrow the curtain shall rise upon the truth. I have heard what I needed. When the suspects had been dismissed, Japp turned on Poirot. Well, did you get what you wanted? Because all I got was a headache and a lot of shouting. Poirot's gaze lingered on the empty stage. I got more than you think, mon ami. In moments of theater, masks slip. Did you not see? When Clara was about to name the one she saw, who silenced her with desperate fury. Verini, Japp admitted grudgingly. Just so. The maestro plays more than music. He conducts the silence, too. That is most curious, is it not? Japp scowled. Are you saying he's our man after all? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. I say only this. Tonight the opera played its midnight rehearsal. Tomorrow we begin the final act. As Poirot and Japp stepped into the foggy night, the great opera house loomed behind them, its windows dark as closed eyes. Within its walls, secrets stirred like restless notes upon a score. And Poirot, the little conductor of truth, was ready to bring them to their crescendo. Chapter 9. The Unmasking. The next morning dawned gray and listless, the rain reduced to a fine drizzle that painted the cobblestones stiffly, hands clenched in her lap, eyes darting to every shadow. Bellini paced like a caged lion, muttering in Italian. Maestro Verini stood near the window, arms crossed, his profile as rigid as stone. Director Latham fussed with his papers, perspiration beading his forehead. Poirot placed his attaché case carefully upon the desk and turned to face them all. His voice was calm, but each word carried a deliberate weight. Mesdames et messieurs, the time has come to examine the roles you played in this opera of death. One of you poisoned Isabella Moretti. But first, let us consider what is true, and what is only performance. He began with Clara. Mademoiselle Dawson, you envied Isabella. She eclipsed you on stage, drew the applause, left you in the shadows. You admit you felt invisible beside her. A strong motive, n'est-ce pas? Clara flinched but lifted her chin. Yes, I envied her. Who would not? But envy is not murder. I swear I had no part in her death. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps. Yet envy often drives one to desperate acts. Still, your tears last night seemed sincere. And poison, it requires calm calculation. Your nature, I think, is too fragile for such a crime. Clara sagged with relief, though doubt still clouded her features. Poirot turned sharply to Bellini. Signor, your passion for Isabella was no secret. You pressed your suit, she rejected you, and your temper burned hot. Passion is dangerous. It blinds. It consumes. Did it drive you to vengeance? Bellini spread his arms dramatically. I loved her. Would I destroy the one I worshipped? Never. She spurned me, yes, but my heart remained hers. I would sooner die than harm her. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Indeed, you are a man of fire, of impulse. But again, poison? That is not the weapon of passion. A knife, perhaps, in the heat of anger. Her demands, her rivalries, her scandals, they threaten the harmony of your company. A dead diva is a costly loss. But perhaps to you, a living one was worse.
Latham dabbed his brow with a handkerchief. That's absurd. She filled the seats, brought wealth to the house. Yes, she was difficult, but without her we are ruined. Why would I kill the goose that laid the golden egg? Poirot tilted his head.
Perhaps. Yet directors, they know many secrets. They control much behind the curtain. One should not dismiss them too readily.
The suspects bristled, exchanging suspicious glances. Poirot allowed the silence to grow heavy, then reached for his attaché case.
Mes amis, I have here certain items, props, if you will, from our little opera.
He withdrew the red leather diary, the broken pearl necklace, and finally the perfume vial, its contents replaced with harmless water.
3 clues,
Poirot said.
The diary, written partly in Isabella's hand, partly tampered with. The pearls, scattered in her chamber, suggesting struggle or staging. And the perfume vial, the vessel of death.
He held up the vial, its glass catching the lamplight.
It is this that sings the loudest. For who would know Isabella's love of perfume? Who would have access to her dressing room, to replace one vial with another? Who would be calm enough to measure the dose, subtle enough to ensure the scent masked the bitterness?
His eyes swept over them one by one.
Not the lover, too fiery. Not the rival, too fragile. Not even the maestro, too tempestuous. No, it is someone else. Someone who thinks of logistics, of appearances, of the smooth running of things.
His gaze settled on Latham. The director blanched.
You accuse me?
Poirot said nothing. The silence was broken by Clara's voice, trembling yet clear.
I saw him. That night, after the performance. It was Mr. Latham I saw leaving Isabella's room.
All heads turned sharply. Latham's face drained of color. That is a lie. Poirot stepped closer.
No, monsieur. It is the truth. You silenced the soul of your opera. Latham covered his face with trembling hands as Japp led him away. When they were gone, silence settled heavily over the room. Clara wept softly. Bellini muttered prayers under his breath. and Varini stared out the window, expression unreadable. Poirot gathered the diary and pearls back into his case, his face solemn. "Thus the curtain falls on our tragedy," he said quietly. "But remember this: envy, pride, passion. These are dangerous, yes. Yet the most dangerous of all is the cold hand of calculation. That, mes amis, is what ended Isabella's song." Later, as Poirot and Japp walked once more into the misty London streets, Japp exhaled heavily. "Well, I'll be damned. The quiet one did it. Not the fiery tenor, not the jealous soprano, not even the maestro. The director of all people." Poirot nodded. "It is often so. The obvious suspects are too obvious. The killer hides not in the spotlight, but in the wings." Japp chuckled grimly. "You really are a devil, Poirot. You see it all." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Not all, mon ami. Only enough. But remember, every crime, it is like an opera. There are arias of passion, duets of rivalry, choruses of rumor. Yet beneath it all there is a score, precise, hidden, inevitable. One must only listen." They walked on in silence, the drizzle pattering softly. In the distance, the opera house loomed, a monument of grandeur and shadow. Within its walls, Isabella Moretti's voice would never sound again. But her tragedy had played to its final act. And Hercule Poirot, the conductor of truth, had guided it to its unmasking. Chapter 10. The Final Curtain. The morning after the arrest dawned pale and muted, as though the very sky mourned the extinguished voice of Isabella Moretti. London, wrapped in fog, seemed reluctant to stir from it. Nicely in court. Poirot inclined his head. But let us not forget. It is not merely evidence that matters, it is understanding. To see clearly why the crime was committed, how it was executed, and how each note in this dark symphony contributed to the final crescendo. That, Japp, is the task of Hercule Poirot. By midday, the surviving principals had gathered one last time at the opera house. The grand hall, usually vibrant with anticipation of performance, now echoed with melancholy silence. The chandeliers sparkled dimly in the gray light seeping through tall windows. Clara Dawson sat apart from the others, her youthful face pale, her eyes rimmed red. Bellini leaned against a marble column, his theatrical figure diminished, the weight of tragedy pressing upon him. Maestro Varini occupied a chair near the orchestra pit, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. They looked up as Poirot entered, immaculate as ever, his mustaches perfectly curled, his step assured. Behind him trailed Japp, less elegant but every bit as determined. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice carrying through the empty hall with a resonance that seemed to belong to the theater itself. "I have asked you here not to torment you further, but to conclude this drama. For though the law has claimed its culprit, the truth deserves its own stage. It is fitting that we gather here, where so much began, to hear the final act." He ascended the stage, turning to face them as though preparing to conduct an orchestra. Poirot lifted one white-gloved hand. "Consider first the victim, Isabella Moretti. A woman of brilliance, yes. Her voice, her beauty, her magnetism drew all eyes. But with brilliance came arrogance, and with arrogance, enemies. She gathered admiration, but also resentment. Clara, who envied her youth. Bellini, whose love she spurned. Verini, whose authority she mocked. And Latham, whose livelihood she both enriched and endangered. He began to pace slowly across the stage. Each of you bore motive. Each of you might have wished, thundered threats. But you are a man of storms. Had you struck, it would have been with violence, not patience. Poison requires restraint. Something you, I think, do not cultivate. Verini gave a bitter laugh. So the serpent was not I, but the director. Fitting. He always sought to control every note. Just so, Poirot said softly. He drew from his attaché case the perfume vial, holding it aloft. Its glass shimmered faintly in the dim light. This, mes amis, is the true weapon. A bottle of perfume, beloved by Isabella, carried always in her dressing room. It was replaced, its essence masked with a tincture of deadly alkaloid. Each application to her skin was another step toward death. Who would think to look in so innocent a place? Who but one obsessed with order, appearances, and control? Poirot's gaze fell upon the empty chair where Latham should have been. The director, Monsieur Latham, was that man. To him, Isabella was not only a star, but a tempest threatening to shatter his theater. He could not strike her openly. Her fame protected her. So he chose the method of precision, of calculation. To preserve the opera, he killed its brightest voice. A gasp escaped Clara's lips. Bellini cursed softly in Italian. Verini closed his eyes. Poirot placed the vial gently upon the table. Thus the melody reached its fatal climax. Isabella Moretti sang her final aria, never knowing she was poisoned by her own beauty. Jap cleared his throat. He's confessed enough to hang himself already, but I'll admit, Poirot, you've painted the picture with more polish than I could have managed. Poirot gave a small bow. Merci, mon ami. But one detail remains, the diary. Isabella's private confidences were altered, lines added in another's hand, to suggest liaisons that never existed. This was meant to mislead, to cast suspicion upon Bellini, upon Verini, perhaps even upon poor Clara. A director's staging, even in death. But the hand betrayed itself, for the ink, the pressure, and those who seek to control the music of others may find themselves conducting only silence. His words hung in the air like the fading note of a violin. Later that evening, Poirot and Jap dined together at a quiet restaurant not far from the Thames. The clink of cutlery and low murmur of conversation surrounded them. But at their table lay the hush of reflection. You know, Jap said between bites of roast beef, I almost went for Verini. Temper like his, I thought it must be him. Would have bungled the whole thing if not for you. Poirot smiled, dabbing his lips with his napkin. It is natural to suspect the loudest voice. But murder, Jap, is often committed by the quietest hand. Remember that. Jap grunted. Well, Scotland Yard owes you again, though we'll never hear the word opera without thinking of poison bottles. Poirot chuckled softly. Ah, but opera is life, mon ami. Passion, envy, pride, deceit, all play upon its stage. And in life, as in opera, the greatest drama is always human. They toasted in silence, glasses raised, while the river outside flowed steady and dark, carrying away the echoes of Isabella's final song.